everybody. Welcome back to The Good Doctor's continuing coverage of Netflix's limited series, Unbelievable. As ever, I am Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
We are here talking about episode 6. We're in the last half of this limited series, so things are starting to ratchet up. Lots of things happen in episode 6, both exciting and terrible. Terrible, again, for our dear Marie. We follow the course of her kind of life exploding and imploding in this episode. We look at her trial, where her lawyer has convinced her that she has to plead guilty in order for this to get expunged and off her record. She pays a $500 fine, and in a year, it's off her permanent record, which is so very generous of the police for her prosecuting her. Don't get me started about how angry it makes me. So things begin to unravel for her emotionally, helped along by her not so helpful former foster mom, Judith. But also, she has a PTSD episode while she's driving for her driver's test that escalates into problems at work where she ends up getting fired. She gets so upset that she gets fired from her job that she goes out on the town with randos that she just met. She comes back to her housing late, high, and drunk, and gets kicked out of her housing, all in one episode. But I think it was such a wonderful way to show the after effects of trauma, and that it's not just remembering the event that happened to you. It's not just the fear that you live with. It affects your entire emotional well-being, which affects every relationship you have. She's a big old blow up with her friend. I can't remember his name, but she's pushing everyone away, understandably, in a way to deal with her trauma. So that's real upsetting. But also, again, with the show, painfully accurate, I feel like.
Yeah, there are lots of ways to deal with trauma. Lots of ways to deal with trauma, but the way that Marie's dealing with it right now is one of the textbook kind of progressions, especially when you have no one you can trust and there is nowhere safe to fall.
Yeah.
That there is the foster parents that are the married couple are the closest she has, and that's who she ends up with when she gets kicked out of the housing. And I think they are genuinely good people who made things worse a couple times just because the world sucks sometimes. But Denise, Farrah Fawcett hair, helped nothing. The police helped nothing, getting kicked out of her housing, which I'll say as somebody who works with a lot of people in that person's job, Marie had to get kicked out.
Yeah,
you have to live by rules in those facilities.
And she is surrounded by a lot of good people who mean well, who still have to follow these rules and regulations, like the people at her housing, like even her foster dad in a previous episode where he was like, I'm sorry, I can't have you in the house with me without my wife here. Like, we're foster parents. Like, it could jeopardize, which was a horribly painful, but also truthful moment. Like, these people, sometimes they mean well. I think in her way, Judith means well too.
Oh, yeah,
and
Judith, not Denise.
She's internalized her trauma from her rape in a certain way that she is now projecting onto Marie. And she's not intentionally damaging this girl, but she is damaging this girl. So that's the story that we get of Marie in this episode. Her trial is the last thing that we see. And Caitlin Dever is just transcended in this episode. And the hesitation when she has to say, when she has to agree to her own guilt. And it's not just enough to say, I plead guilty, but the judge has to go through this performative statements, and she has to say yes and no and answer. And you could tell it was her whole being was this is a lie. But she had to choke it anyway, which was so beautifully done, very simply. We're big fans of face acting. If you haven't seen our coverage of The Handmaid's Tale and Elizabeth Moss's insane,
you can do a lot with your face,
insane ability to face act. Caitlin Dever is of, I would say, the Elizabeth Moss caliber.
Yeah, she's very, very good. And it was even more stark then. This was a hard episode because it was even more stark that once we switch over to Rasmussen and Duvall, they are frustrated and spinning their wheels and Rasmussen is still onto her husband to get her this IE file for this guy that she's convinced did it. She tracks him down to a bar. Guy's onto her. Duvall can't, like, does a backyard search, can't find anything else at Lily's house. Like, there's all these, like, oh my God. And then puppy intern Elias.
We love Elias.
Who is so afraid of every woman on this show.
So blissfully intimidated. It's so adorable.
It's wonderful because they have no time to coddle him, which I also love.
Uh-huh. Nor would he be coddled by male detectives either.
Exactly.
So, like, suck it up, buddy.
Yeah.
These are not your moms.
Nope.
These ladies
are your bosses.
Have business to attend to.
So he tracks the Mazdas. We get a name, finally, Christopher McCarthy.
Yeah.
In the midst of this episode is my favorite scene.
Oh, so good.
And then my second and third favorite scenes.
We love this episode.
I love this episode. First of all, and we will steal this phrase from Variety, this episode passes the Bechdel test with such flying colors, it basically shoots rainbows. The incredible development of their relationship in this episode, these two master craftsmen who embodied these women.
Oh, Toni Collette and our girl Merritt. Come on.
So they have a really fascinating conversation about the first time that Duvall ever met Rasmussen.
Yeah.
That is great. And Rasmussen's really kind of harsh about, like, I don't do mentoring, and she has been all the way through. Like, I don't do this. And Duvall just keeps kind of poking at her.
She's like,
because, like, by the way, you are a mentor?
By the way, you're mentoring me right now?
Sorry? And this is a great reflection. We have lots of, like, existential conversations in business leadership about how women are bad at mentoring other women, and we need to do that. And this episode made me think, like, maybe we just already are, and maybe we don't need as many structures.
Yeah.
Maybe we just need to teach people to observe more closely.
Yeah.
And
to share stories. Like, I think the fact that Rasmussen, as they develop a personal relationship, shares more of her stories, and more of herself in that way. That's mentoring Duvall by just talking about her process and sharing that they have similar experiences. In this scene, they both, or in the scene in this episode, they both talk about how they still remember all the details of their first rape case.
Yep.
And, like, just sharing that is a way of mentoring. By, like, yeah, I do it too. Yes, I remember that too. And that's, maybe we have to just work smarter,
not harder. I don't need another lunch every month. I know that. So I would rather have discussions about who can I observe more closely and who can I ask specific questions to when the opportunity arises, not in some sort of forced way. Mm-hmm. So then also Rasmussen hits the end of her rope. Girl. In a very intense scene in which she curses out Duvall's faith. Mm-hmm. And her God, I would say, as somebody who is a person of faith, this has happened to me many times, and it's uncomfortable every single time.
Every single time.
I'm never upset with the people that do it because I get it, but it's always a little bit upset. And Merritt Wever did an incredible job of, like, receiving it as somebody who's just like, yep, I can see why you think that. And they had a great conversation about it. And
one of the great lines, too, of the season where she goes, like, your God hasn't done any favors for us. And then Duvall's character says, I hope, like, this guy chokes on his own vomit or something. And she was like, well, that's not very Christian of you. And she goes, ooh, you need to read the Old Testament.
We're big on vengeance.
Which is just, like, such a beautiful way of diffusing a situation and making a joke out of it and saying, like, no, I get to be angry too. Like, my faith gives me space to be angry about this as well, which was a good reminder.
Yeah. And it just was a really human episode on the face of them. I was almost glad that we weren't juxtaposed with, like, celebrations and Marie's trial. Like, everything is awkward in both places. Everything is intense. And it's also a good reminder that Marie pleaded guilty in 2008 and we're finally catching him in 2011.
Yeah. And it's still this never ending slog of going through, and, like, the frustration that these women express.
Yep.
And, like, one of the notes I had from this episode was, like, we are seeing these two women detectives have to learn from and fix all the mistakes of the past detectives. Yep. And so, like, when justice isn't served, it's not just that one time that it impacts the victims and survivors and that particular case. this has like knock-on effects throughout the criminal justice system. And, you know, it's awful to sit there and think of that 3-year gap and how many women were victimized by this person who they believe is Christopher McCarthy. Although they also discover at the end that he has a brother who has a very similar build as well, which they discover at the time that they're gaining DNA evidence. And it was, it's one of those moments where this show is still so good at building tension, even though like I knew what happened, but I was still just like, oh, what's happening?
And it was old good old Ken Cosgrove from Mad Men. I was like, hi, buddy. How you doing? Yeah.
It was, wasn't it? That's right, was the brother. So that's where the episode leaves us, with the realizations that we could have potentially 2 attackers, or difficulty in figuring out which one is which. And like, God love the Colorado DA, who is like, just inserts himself in every couple of episodes to be like, this is gonna be really hard, here's what I need from you. It's totally exposition and I love it, but he was like,
no, it was really helpful.
It could be really, really hard if you don't have exact DNA, like, because of the type of DNA that they were using, DNA testing, they wouldn't be able to prove definitively which brother it was. And he was like, that is not going to go well in a trial. You need more than that DNA, please and thank you. And like, I was like, cool, I didn't know that, thanks. Helpful, nameless white DA guy.
Yeah, because we are learning, as well as we do another kind of deep dive into the criminal justice system on another side, which we'll talk to you about a little bit in April, and the review of the documentary 13th, that a lot of criminal justice actually lies entirely in the hands of prosecutors and defense attorneys, and the negotiations that go between them. So that's why when I was watching this, I was like, oh yeah, a judge would never be part of this conversation.
Right.
Because this is all at a DA level because of how we've done sentencing in the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good look at like, oh no, this is how we get convictions.
Yeah.
And yeah, guys, if you haven't picked up on this by now, watch the show.
We love the show. Come on, give it some love.
Come watch it with us. Talk to us.
Join us in this conversation.
And in the meantime, we'll see, hopefully, you again for episode 7.
Bye.